Muchas gracias, Inde, gracias a Fernando, gracias a IDEA por la posibilidad de tener esta entrevista. Ustedes vieron que había una encuesta que los tiene como protagonistas a quienes están detrás de nuestras cámaras en esta experiencia nueva que estamos viviendo y donde les preguntamos desde dónde deben resolverse los desafíos del capitalismo. Hay tres opciones: las instituciones globales, las dinámicas regionales, por cada país. Y esto tiene que ver con lo que vamos a charlar en este rato con Paul Collier. ¿Quién es Paul Collier? Paul Collier es académico, es profesor de economía, de políticas públicas, nada más y nada menos que de la escuela de Oxford, una de las más prestigiosas a nivel internacional. Investigó y mucho sobre 50 sociedades, muchas de las más pobres. Se metió también en lo que en la jerga llaman el éxodo, algo que estamos viendo en algunas partes de nuestra sociedad, de gente que busca un destino más allá de lo que estamos viviendo, más allá de su país. Es polémico, es apasionado, es interesante, es economista de profesión y a su vez acaba de escribir otro libro, que todavía no está la traducción en la Argentina, pero próximamente va a estar, que tiene que ver con que la codicia, dice Paul Collier, la codicia está muerta y la política que viene es la política después del individualismo. Vamos a saludarlo a Paul Collier. Good morning, Paul. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing yourself. You are a professor in economics and public policy at Oxford University. Your latest books, one of your latest books, is about the future of capitalism. I have read that you believe that in today's world we have more haters, more extremisms, and also less dialogue, and also less consensus. It seems that too many extreme ideas are all around us. My first question is about that, is how can this be modified? Paul, welcome.
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me. We're living through a rather dangerous and tragic times in which, indeed, our societies are polarizing. We see it most obviously in America, but it's true in many societies, and that's very, very dangerous. Dialogue is the secret resource of a democracy. Dialogue is a backwards and forwards between equals. It's like playing ping pong, playing table tennis, and gradually through backwards and forwards between equals, you start to understand each other's position, and you start to forge not just a common understanding, but then some common purposes. If only we could all do this together, then things will be better. And from there, the final step is you recognize that you have common obligations. Everybody becomes, to a degree, morally load-bearing. So that's a healthy society. It's the structure of a community, a dialogue which leads to common purposes and common responsibilities. We've lost it. We've lost it.
You know, Paul, there are lots of critics to the economic man, the Homo economicus, and you have your last book about the greedy, selfish, and also the egoist. How to build a common purpose? I mean, as you told us, in a group and also in a mutual responsible behavior.
Yeah, so this is the latest. It's not in Spanish yet, unlike the Future of Capitalism. But how do you build common purpose when you've lost it? Well, you start from recognizing what the other person's saying. If you want to form a dialogue with the other person, it's no good just shouting more loudly what you want them to hear. You've got to start by listening to what they want to say and try to build out of their initial understanding. They've probably got it wrong, but until you recognize what they're saying, they won't even listen. And then the really painful bit is that you recognize they don't trust you. And so you have to do something which is probably quite painful to you, quite costly. You do something that if you were the greedy bastard that they suspect, you just wouldn't do it. And that is what in economics is called a signal. The guy who thought of it got a Nobel Prize. By taking these costly actions that demonstrate your commitment to some purpose other than just yourself, you start to build trust. So recognize where we are and try and build out of it.
You know, Paul, in Argentina, the same is happening. I mean, it's too difficult to have a common purpose. There's a big gap between the government followers and also the followers of the opposition. There are also demonstrations, protests, and people have been criticized by the government as leaders of hatred. How can this be solved?
So you've got to get out of each side viewing it as a zero-sum game. Either I win or they win, and if I win, they lose. If they win, I lose. You've got to get out of that. In a country like Argentina, where so much has gone wrong for so long, not unlike my own country, Britain, there are just huge scopes for mutual gains. There's a lot that can be done which will actually make everybody better. And those are the actions you've got to look for. Don't try and win, don't try and defeat the other. Try and build some things where everybody can be better off. As you do that, people will gradually start to listen to each other and to trust each other.
It's a matter of trust. I mean, you also wrote about the productive clusters. I mean, how can these productive clusters can be generated in smaller cities all around the country and not only the big cities? That's part of your Future of Capitalism.
Yeah, so my own country is the most spatially unequal country in the OECD. It's been getting worse for 40 years. And now there's a political reaction, a mutiny. That's what Brexit was about. It wasn't really a mutiny against Brussels, it was a mutiny against London. And the truth is, the government realizes politically it has got to do something about this, but it doesn't know how to do it. So how can it do it? In a broken city, like where I grew up, Sheffield, there used to be a big steel industry and it collapsed. So now it's a broken city. A lot of things go wrong. And then you've got to try and operate on all of them together. And so what we need is some pilot examples of reviving broken cities. In Spain, you can look at Bilbao as an example. What revived Bilbao was the Guggenheim Museum. If you tried to do an economic cost-benefit analysis of Guggenheim Museum, it would have come out as zero. But actually, it made Bilbao a cool place to live. It put it on the map. So you need to do rather dramatic things across a range of problems together.
You know, Paul, this doesn't seem to be so easy. I mean, as only Edinburgh achieved this in the United Kingdom, for example. But what should the role of the public and also the private sector be in order to accelerate this process?
Yeah, so this is not something that can be done by a national government to a local place. It has to be done by the local place with a lot of different groups of people within that local place working together. There's a role for business. Obviously, if an economy has collapsed, business is part of putting it together. But quite often, if jobs collapse, families start to collapse. Certainly happened very badly in Britain. And that requires social enterprise to try and put it right. And then there's the public sector. The public sector typically controls universities and colleges of training. And there's a huge role for universities to work with firms to come up with, the universities do the fundamental research, and that then leads into good commercial ideas. Switzerland is specialized in that, in universities of applied technology, where they just keep getting ideas that are one step from being commercial. And the University of Applied Technology works with entrepreneurs to take that step forward.
Paul,
So Switzerland's shown how to do it.
but I mean, how can we develop these skills within society?
Again, Switzerland's shown how to do it. The skills, vocational training, are very much better done in Switzerland than in Britain. Britain, we have some of the best universities in the world. We got, I think, 4 in the top 10 worldwide. So we're brilliant if you've got a lot of cognitive gifts. But if you're in the half of the population that's less cognitively gifted, you need vocational training. Britain really doesn't do it. Switzerland does. It puts a lot of money, including a lot of money from firms at the local level, into 3- and 4-year training courses. People come out of those training courses highly productive, highly employable. And so they're actually given jobs by the local firms that are part of the training. If Switzerland can do that, Argentina can do that. That's what I'm trying to encourage Britain to do. We're not doing it yet.
Paul, do you believe in a new normal?
Yes, I think that was really the message of the latest book, Greed is Dead. The subtitle is Politics After Individualism. And I think the new normal is going to be a return to community. It's not just my little book. Raghu Rajan, the most eminent business economist in America, professor of business at the University of Chicago, just come out with a book called The Third Pillar. And what is the third pillar? It's community. Something between the state and the individual. We've overemphasized individualism and individual greed. Remember that film, Greed is Good? So greed was supposed to be the fuel of capitalism. And that's why chief executives got paid 300 times the wages of their workers to fuel all that greed. Greed isn't the fuel of capitalism. The fuel of capitalism is decentralized decisions into teams that have the agency, the autonomy, to come up with solutions to new problems. The top knows, if you want to run a system called the top knows best, that was communism. And it blew up because in a complicated world, the top very seldom has all the answers. We have to discover those answers. And we discover them by experiments done in parallel in teams. And that is the genius of a well-run capitalist system.
This is really interesting. I mean, what role does individual responsibility play in order to deal with this pandemic and also with this greed that you told us?
Yeah, so COVID is a really good example of where we need rapid agreement on a new common purpose. If you think back to January and you asked leaders of business, leaders of government, what should we do about COVID? The honest answer was, we don't know. Right? And so you need to get a common purpose of try and contain this disease while we find out what to do. The most successful country in Europe for coping with COVID is Denmark. And how did Denmark do it? It didn't choose some trade-off between do we protect the economy or do we protect lives. It's got the lowest economic hit in Europe and the lowest mortality in Europe. So it's done both. And that's because it had a very good, modest leader, a young woman who didn't have much education and brought up, she was a single mother. And so she didn't claim she knew what to do. But when she said here's a new common purpose, we must all behave responsibly, people were prepared to listen. She could say we, and people said, yes, she's one of us. And so she realized two things. One is, if we don't know, one thing you really do need to know as an individual is, do you have COVID? And so for that, you need to have a lot of testing. So Denmark expanded testing. You as an individual could find out as a family, did you have COVID? If you got COVID, the next thing she said is, if you got COVID, don't infect other people. And so they were able to reopen the schools very early. That avoided the irreversible damage of closed schools and no education. And the message was, behave responsibly. If you're a young person, get on with your life, but don't kill your grandma. If you're an old person, like me, stay out of the way of young people. Protect yourself. Behave sensibly. That worked in Denmark.
Paul,
if we go...
Denmark in Europe, we also have the example of Uruguay here in South America. But why do you think the governments do not believe individuals can be responsible by themselves? Why is this happening?
Yeah, that's the culture of the top knows best. And that was the big error that came out of Chicago with Milton Friedman. A theory that we knew what to do. In the phrase of economics at the time, we know the model. So all you need is a super smart chief executive who knows what to do. And then his problem is how to force others to do it. And the answer is you scrutinize others like a hawk, and you give them high-powered incentives matched by penalties if they do the wrong thing. That top-down scrutiny, a hierarchy. Hierarchy works if you really do know what to do, but most of the time we don't. And so we have to balance the benefits of hierarchy with the benefits of community. If you don't know what to do, you really need community, where everybody takes some responsibility and tries to work out what seems to be best, and then learns from each other rapidly. We're very good as a species at copying things that work. That is the secret of our success as a species.
I mean, unfortunately, this pandemic has created more unemployment and also more poverty all around the world. How will capitalism address these issues? It's like you told us recently.
So, some things have worked really well as a result of COVID. We're using one now, Zoom. Huh? We didn't even know about Zoom, most of us, before COVID. We've learned that it's enabled wonderful possibilities, and we will retain all that. So the future, using Zoom properly, will be a better future. But there's things that Zoom can't do. It can't build trust. You can sustain a game of ping pong, but you can't start a game of ping pong. Really, you can't. For that, you need face to face. And so the danger of COVID is that we're actually destroying community at the moment. Some societies, like Denmark, have managed to surmount it. They've just built a new common purpose because they were already pretty used to building common purpose. Others, like America, which were already full of hatred and polarized, what did COVID do? Queues outside pawn shops. So let's protect your neighbor than shoot your neighbor. Shoot your neighbor doesn't even work as a strategy against COVID. It just amplifies the divergence in society.
Paul, how can another world depression as the one we had in 1929 be avoided?
Oh, it will be avoided. We've learned a lot since 1929. And so around the world, governments are pretty sensibly running big deficits. People are frightened by COVID and so they're saving. but they're too uncertain in order to invest. And so the private sector response is big savings, but very little investment. And that's why real interest rates, corrected for inflation, have crashed to negative. And so it's sensible now for governments to step in and fill that gap, to actually spend the money, especially on investments, to get things back in place. So we're in a phase, a temporary phase, like what pulled us out of the Depression, of big spending by government. We don't want that to become a permanent norm. We've already, I think, got too much government already, too much individual already. We need to rebuild that area in the middle. The morally load-bearing firm, the purposive firm, and the morally load-bearing community, and the morally load-bearing family. These are the elements which make a successful society thrive. It's not state and individual. It's all the things.
In the Future of Capitalism, you wrote that the decline syndrome, as you told, started almost 5 decades ago. And how do you think this can be reverted? I mean, the decline syndrome.
So the decline syndrome is a set of fears. We see that amongst the young in a lot of countries now. The young are really pessimistic. Now, if you think about it, this has been a massive failure of public policy. Not just of public policy, it's a failure of firms as well to transmit to ordinary people that there are very powerful reasons for confidence. Technology is advancing really pretty fast, and that means it's possible to have futures which are better for all of us. The tragedy of the last 40 years is that those technological innovations, which were wonderful in themselves, benefited some people a lot, but hit others. And that's why people are fearful. We didn't use technology to lift all boats. Technology doesn't do that automatically. You need active public policy, and you need firms that recognize a purpose that is beyond just profit. Profit can't be a purpose. Who on earth gets up in the morning and say, today I'm going to maximize shareholder value? Nobody at all. Right? It's not a reason for getting up. There are good reasons for getting up. Our societies are full of problems, and a good firm commits to addressing some of those problems. Not all, it's not a substitute for government, but very often more effective than government in very many terms.
You know,
so we need purposeful firms, we need purposeful government, and we need a bit of optimism that says, optimism that isn't crazy optimism, optimism which says we can harness all the benefits of this technology for everybody.
There's also a global debate nowadays, and the question is, how can pragmatism prevail over populisms and also extreme nationalisms that are globally increasing?
Yeah, so I'm a pragmatist, and the enemy of pragmatism, there are two enemies. One is ideology. An ideologue thinks they got a model which works forever. They've understood how the world works, and it will always work in the same way. A pragmatist recognizes that is ridiculous. The world is way more complex than we can ever fully understand. And so we keep being plunged into ambitions and problems that we don't know how to deal with. We deal with those problems gradually by by learning by experiment. We try things out. So that's the pragmatic philosophy. There is no utopia. There is no definitive model of how the world works. So ideology is one enemy, and we've got it on the far left, we've got it on the far right. The other enemy is populism. And what's populism? It's mavericks, typically very good, charismatic people who can get attention, the A-list celebrities. Populism diagnoses the problem. It relates to ordinary people and it hears their pain. And so it can speak their pain back to them. And that's why they listen. But of course, populism has no solution for those problems. What it offers is snake oil. And so we've got snake oil from the left. Britain had it with Corbyn, fortunately now gone. America's got ideology and populism from the right. Trump was populism from the right. The snake oil always fails, and that's the tragedy, and it leaves people more depressed and more despondent. So we've got to re-establish the message that we live in a hopeful world, and that through trying things out together, we will learn. We won't learn the solution for all time. We won't get to utopia. It doesn't exist. But by pragmatism and optimism, we can actually harness all this continuing improvements in technology, and we can harness it for everybody. We need firms, we need social entrepreneurs, as well as governments and families. And that, I think, is the world that we'll gradually move towards, because populists rapidly get discredited and ideologues crash when their ideologies are refuted, as communism was in 1989. It collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions.
Paul, there's another thing that you wrote in your books that's really part of our Argentinian nowadays. In the Future of Capitalism, you state that there are big gaps in our societies and that the people are getting angrier and angrier because of different reasons. I mean, geographical, educational, and also economic reasons. Why does this happen?
Yeah, so it happened for fairly straightforward reasons. The two big divergences in our societies, one is spatial, between a booming metropolis, Buenos Aires, London, and broken provincial cities, like my own home city of Sheffield. So that's a spatial divide. Why did that happen? Because of globalization. It produced fewer, bigger winners and a lot of losers. My own home city of Sheffield lost its steel industry to South Korea. The other big divide is educational. My parents both left school when they were 12, but I was the first generation to get a decent education. I got to Oxford, I became a professor, and on the back of those cognitive skills, I went up the ladder of escalating value of specialist skills. The people who didn't get a good education invested in manual skills, and globalization has made those less and less valuable as the technology has replaced them. So those were what caused the problems, the divergences. The answer is not reverse globalization. It's come up with ways that offset those effects. And there are plenty of ways. Germany, for example, has not had anything like the spatial divide. There are successful cities all around Germany, north, south, east, west, and in the middle, right? Not everybody wants to go to Berlin. Right? Switzerland has addressed the skills divide. You can be very proud of a vocational skill. In fact, you can end up running a Swiss bank through the vocational route of training as well as through the university route. So there are ways of healing and of offsetting these divides without reversing the engine that sort of lays the eggs, which is the globalization process. So it was the failure of both public policy through governments and of firms who walked away from their responsibilities to their communities and to their workforces. Those are the steps, that walking away, that has led into catastrophe. Not the globalization, but the failures to heal the rifts which technology created.
It's so important this about the education and the main engine driving the new league of successful people also. You know, you have another book, you wrote lots of books, and this is Exodus. Why are people leaving? And nowadays in Argentina we have lots of people a little bit disappointed with the reality, with COVID, and also with some things of our future. Why are people leaving?
People are leaving societies where, where they feel they don't have a hopeful future. It's happened in Eastern Europe, Romania. Romanians have got free movement within Europe because of the European community. A third of Romania's doctors have left to work in places like Paris. Nicer place to be, higher income, but it's left small town Romania without doctors. So that's a catastrophe. That's to be avoided at all costs. And so you have to try and develop a credible narrative that the future offers prosperous opportunities for young people. Otherwise, the brightest and the best young people will leave, and you will spiral into a syndrome of decline. So you have, as a first order task, firms above all have got to build some credible prospects of a better future, a purposive future. And the Chinese go back to China to a very large extent because they're much poorer in China than they are in America or Britain. But they've got this sense that China is the future. And so they're willing to take a hit now in order to be part of that exciting future. You've got to give that sense to young, skilled and well-educated Argentinians. The future is yours. It's here. There's things to do.
This is related with another thing. I mean, there are a lot of people in Europe and also in the US that have lost their jobs and turned to alcohol, drugs, and also saw how their families were destroyed. How can these people be rejoined the workforce?
Yes, so at its limit, that's the phenomenon known as deaths of despair, where people get so despondent, having lost their jobs, that they become addicted to drugs or drink and spiral down, and that affects not just one person, but a whole family. And that continues from one generation to the next. So these are very dangerous things. What to do about it? This is where social enterprise comes in, as well as business. Business needs to protect the jobs. Business has a trade-off at the moment between short-term profits, which say get rid of people, and long-term purpose, which says, really, what is this firm? It's not a pot of money. It's a collection of people who work together for common purpose. That's what's called organizational capital. Firms, good firms, are really organizational capital, and that needs to be protected. By putting your workforce before profits, you create exactly that signal that I talked about earlier that says we're willing to sacrifice our own short-term interest for the common purpose of this community. A good business is a community. Both social enterprise, which addresses things like addiction and broken families, and business responsibility to actually try and retain workers. My Zoom before this was with a very successful entrepreneur who's built a very successful business, and he was telling me that in parallel to running his business in a way that engages his staff, in parallel he's actually creating and funding social enterprises to actually tackle social problems within the community where he's operating.
Paul,
so a good businessman can do both.
Thank you so much for being here with us. It was a pleasure to have this interview with you, and also we are grateful that you could share your ideas and also the future of capitalism with us. Great pleasure.
Thank you very much. I hope I've left you a little bit more hopeful than what I found you.
Yes.
Argentina will have a prosperous future. Believe in it and talk about it.
That will be our title, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Era Paul Collier, un lujo que nos damos. Esto es lo que tiene la ventaja de este proyecto de idea, versión virtual, la ventaja de poder tener a los mejores speakers a nivel global. Él es un bestseller global y nos dejó algo de esperanza, ¿no? En un contexto donde justamente investigó, no puntualmente por América Latina, pero sí fenómenos que se dieron en Europa y que tienen tantas similitudes con lo que estamos viviendo en nuestro país. Para cerrar, les dejo la respuesta que ustedes dieron. ¿Desde dónde deben resolverse los desafíos del capitalismo? Les preguntamos de manera interactiva a través de nuestras tablets, y gracias por las preguntas que fui sumando, habrán visto en la entrevista a Paul Collier. Y la respuesta de quienes están participando a través de la plataforma de IDEA es que un 37% desde donde deben resolverse los desafíos del capitalismo están en instituciones globales, un 22% en cada país. Y la respuesta, que tuvo 4 de cada 10 afirmaciones, fue que tiene que ver con dinámicas regionales, con mirar al vecino, unirte al vecino y gestar a partir de ahí un futuro del capitalismo mejor para todos. Así que muchos títulos nos ha dejado Paul Collier. Terminar con esa cuestión de individualismo, pasar a mirar al otro, tratar de tener un propósito común. A veces suena lejos, nuestra bendita Argentina, pero ojalá sirva, y de eso se trata el coloquio de idea, para despertarnos y construir entre todos un futuro mejor. Ustedes no se vayan, Vamos a ir un muy breve corte, y después tienen las sesiones interactivas, un mano a mano de Fernando González con el ministro de Economía, Martín Guzmán, y con 2 referentes de la economía local, nada más y nada menos que Hernán Lacunza y Martín Redrado. Queda mucho coloquio de idea. Gracias por haber estado del otro lado.